The Mendip Hills rise to the north of the Somerset levels, and where the two meet there's a fascinating area for the visitor to explore on a day out, not least because of some spectacular natural features, like this one to be found at Wookey Hole.
You know, there's something rather awe-inspiring and mysterious about a river that flows out of the bowels of the earth through a large cave in the rock face, just like this. And in fact, in this case, the effect is also rather beautiful too. So I can quite understand why it is that people feel that this was the very spot that prompted the poet Coleridge to pen the lines, "Where Alf, the sacred river, ran through caverns, measureless to man." But in fact, this is the River Axe, and this really is the point at which it gets its first glimpse of daylight before it plunges down into a truly lovely valley that twists and turns as far as the Somerset levels. It then flows out into the Bristol Channel, quite near to Weston-super-Mare. Around 11 to 12 million gallons of water a day come gushing out of here. And it's been estimated that before the waters even get this far, they've already been collected in and travelled through around 200 miles of underground passages in just this one small area of the Mendip Hills.
Here at Wookey Hole you can see some of these subterranean passages, and they really are pretty impressive. But although the water flowing through them may look inviting, as the guides point out, it's anything but.
Now, it does look rather nice for a swim, but don't be fooled, it's really cold. If you want to swim in it, you need to wear a wetsuit, a diving suit. British cave water is usually about 47, 48 degrees, which is only about 9 degrees centigrade. It really is very, very cold.
It's the water that's created the caves because limestone, which is what the rock here is made of, is slightly soluble. Over the years, the streams have gradually dissolved away the surfaces of the cracks through which they've passed and made them ever wider and deeper. Visitors now use passages that have been left high and dry as the streams have sunk down to lower levels. The water can redeposit some of the limestone that it's previously absorbed when it drips, and it's in this way that stalactites, hanging from the ceiling, and stalagmites, growing from the ground, are formed. But it's a long, slow job. This 14-foot-high specimen has been 250,000 years in the making.
Well, one of the formations created by this process has given rise to a local legend. They say that an old witch used to live in these caves. As you can imagine, she wasn't a very popular lady. She terrorized the neighborhood with her spells and her generally uncivilized behavior. Well, one day when she was casseroling a child that she'd taken from the local village, a very brave priest, some say even a monk from Glastonbury, crept into these caves and got so close that he was able to sprinkle her with holy water. And just like that, she turned into stone. And there she is, one petrified witch of Wookey. Admittedly, some people do find it a little difficult to recognize her, but I think if you look very hard, you can just see the gnarled nose and chin. Remember, she is very old. Well, it's a good story, isn't it? And while the turning to stone may be just a little bit over the top, it is worth remembering this. At the beginning of this century, when they were excavating these caves, they found some very early remains. Among them, there was the skull of a young girl, and it had been smashed deliberately. Close by, there were other human and animal bones, all broken in the same way and ready for the cooking pot. They also found a knife and a small, round stone ball. Makes you think, doesn't it? Oh, incidentally, this witch didn't have a cat. She had a dog, and he got some of the holy water treatment too. That's him.
Now this is really something. Here the swirling river water has carved out the cave, and it's now rather like standing inside a huge bowl that's been turned upside down. This is Chamber 3, and it's where in 1935 divers made the first ever cave dive using breathing apparatus in the British Isles. The rope still guides cavers today. You can now walk along a passage that's been blasted through the rock, but early divers had to take a long and dangerous underwater route to reach chambers further on. This is Chamber 9, which was discovered in 1948. What an amazing experience it must have been for those who saw here what man had never seen before. And exploration is still going on, in an attempt to find out just how far the cave system really goes.
Well, so far they've discovered 25 chambers and 2 miles of tunnels. Makes you wonder what mysteries there are still to be discovered, doesn't it?
The water flowing out of the caves has been used since before the Doomsday Book to power a mill, and by 1610 it had become a paper mill, one of the earliest in the country. By the beginning of the present century it had become the largest of its kind in Europe, using cotton and linen rags as raw material. This room is where a team of girls removed buttons, hooks and pieces of whalebone from the rags before they could be reduced to a fibrous porridge like this. They still make paper here today, although the rags have now been replaced by pure cotton. And it's almost hypnotic to watch what are called the coocher and the vatman at work.
Well, as with anything that's done by an expert or a craftsman, it all looks terribly easy, doesn't it? But I don't suppose for one moment that it is. In fact, Ian Wilcox here has been making paper for 10 years, hasn't it, Ian?
Yes, yes.
So tell me what you do to actually make the paper in that little frame.
You put the deco on the mould, and then you dip the mould into the stuff, what we call stuff.
Draw it towards you, then.
You give it a Batman stroke.
Yeah.
The shakes to bind the fibres together.
All right, can I have a go?
Yeah.
See how much waste paper I can make. There we go. Right, so draw it towards me.
Yeah.
Right in.
Yeah, gently.
Oh, it's heavy.
Gently. You
Now
shake
what?
it. Yes, sir. Just cast a bit off, that's it. That's it.
How's
Then
that?
Put it up there.
Oh, looks like scrambled eggs gone wrong, doesn't it? Like I said, it's not as easy as it looks.
There's another display here that's unashamedly gaudy, but that's exactly what it's meant to be. A successful fairground has to catch the eye and the ear of the public and take people away from the real world for a while. And these items of old fairground paraphernalia do just that. Just a mile or so from Wookey Hole is the smallest city in England, Wells. Its most famous feature is its cathedral. Newly restored, it's a magnificent example of early English architecture. It's certainly a must for any visitor to the area. And if you like historic ecclesiastical buildings, you should also pay a visit to Glastonbury.
This small Somerset town boasts one of the most magnificent ruined abbeys in the country. And before it was dissolved by Henry VIII, it was fabulously wealthy, and it owed much of its status, indeed its aura of holiness, to the legend that this was the cradle of Christianity here in Britain. So in this one place, you have a fascinating blend of legend and history.
According to tradition, as a boy, Jesus himself visited Glastonbury with his uncle, Joseph of Arimathea, a trader who would have come to the Mendips in search of lead. Joseph came back after the crucifixion to bring the Christian message to the people of this country. He built a church on this very spot, and it's actually documented that an ancient wattle and daub church was destroyed by fire here in 1184. Joseph knew that this was the place to build his church because when he'd arrived here, he'd planted his staff up on Wearyall Hill, and it had immediately blossomed into a thorn tree. A descendant of that tree is still here today, overlooking the abbey. Tradition also says he brought with him the chalice used by Christ at the Last Supper, the Holy Grail, and buried it somewhere in Glastonbury. The medieval ruins are the result of the dissolution of the monasteries ordered in 1539, and they certainly evoke a very special atmosphere. There are a number of other abbey buildings around the town. This is the tribunal, an ecclesiastical courthouse dating from the 15th century. A few yards down the main street is the George and Pilgrims Hotel, again 15th century. It was originally built, as the name suggests, as an inn for pilgrims. The Tithe Barn now houses the award-winning Somerset Rural Life Museum. The abbey also features in the Arthurian legend. In 1191, the monks claimed to have discovered the grave of King Arthur and his Queen Guinevere within the abbey grounds. And this bridge over the River Brue just outside the town is also part of the story. It's the Pons Perillis where Arthur gave up his sword Excalibur to a hand that appeared from the waters. He had been fatally wounded at the Battle of Camlan and was being taken to his final resting place, to Glastonbury, the Isle of Avalon. This is the source of the River Sheppey at Dolting. At least, that's what the river's called on maps, but its proper name is the Dolting Water. St. Aldhelm, who lived in Saxon times, spent a lot of time here, reading and meditating. And he's commemorated by this little stone construction known as St. Aldhelm's Well. The Dolting Water, swift-flowing but now hardly noticeable as it passes through Shepton Mallet, was the reason for the town's prosperity. It powered more than 30 cloth mills, making Shepton Mallet an important centre of the woolen industry. In its heyday, the trade supported over 4,000 people in this one small area of the river valley. Workers' cottages and owners' mansions were all built side upon back. Not surprisingly, privacy was an expensive luxury, and that's the reason for the stone wall covering the end of this house. It wasn't built by the owner of the house, it was built by his neighbour, right on the limits of his land. Can you see, it doesn't actually touch the house at any point. Now that made sure that the people living in the house couldn't look into the neighbour's garden. It's got a very appropriate name. It's a spite wall. To see more of Shepton Mallet, you have to climb out of the valley.
Well, this is the very centre of the town. It's the marketplace, and they do in fact still have an open-air market here one day in every week. When this whole area was redeveloped in the mid-1970s, the planners were able to maintain the original outline of the market square, which means that today it looks much as it would have done when the town got its first market charter in the early 13th century. And the whole thing is dominated by that, a magnificent 50-foot-high market cross. But this wasn't just a decorative centerpiece, it had a practical purpose as well. There was a time when any stallholder who could get underneath these arches and set up on the terraces could sell their butter, their eggs, their poultry or whatever without having to pay any of the market tolls. So if you ask me, come market day, there was always a bit of an argy-bargy here between the stallholders to see who could get in first. Many of the buildings around the marketplace were built with arches as well, so that stalls could be conveniently set up in them. And you can still see some of them preserved for posterity in the modern design. So it's all very neat and tidy and nicely laid out. But that is a shambles. Now, you may have already known, but I certainly didn't, that the shambles were the stalls that were used exclusively by the butchers in the market. The term comes from the Anglo-Saxon word scammel, which means a little bench. And when you think of all the messy things that butchers have to do on their little benches, it's very easy to see why we now use the word shambles to mean a terrible mess. Well, if you're interested in history or curiosities, then this really is a little gem. Now, I'm not sure whether it's one shamble or three shambles, but certainly it was at one time part of a much longer run. And as far as people around here are concerned, this is the only one of its kind that's still in existence anywhere in the country.
One of the town's greatest assets is Collet Park. Now, although it's set aside for the enjoyment of everybody, it's especially popular with children. There's even a pets corner where children can get used to animals. Or not, as the case may be. The man in charge of the town's parks, Fred Davies, has probably researched and written more about Shepton Mallet than anyone. He explains how a man called John Kite Collett was responsible for the park's existence.
Young Kite Collett, as a boy, son of a local school teacher, was walking in these grounds, which then belonged to the gaffer, just over the wall, and he was evicted for trespass. He swore that, if ever, he would then purchase these very lands for the benefit of the children of this town, and indeed he did. In 1900, he went to a local auction and bought the first of the fields that were to form Collet Park as we see it today.
And you've got, what, 14 acres altogether
And we've
now?
got 14.5 acres for a population of just 6,500.
That's a marvellous legacy to have, isn't it?
It is indeed.
In fact, you've written several books about the town, and in your two latest, there's some absolutely wonderfully evocative photographs and postcards. Which are your favourites?
Well, the first are, I think, the marketplace itself, the old marketplace, the Lamb Inn, with this arcaded building, under which the wool market was held, and the Anglo-Bavarian brewery. The gaffer I was telling you about earlier was a part owner of this, but the interesting part of the Anglo-Bavarian, apart from the obvious size of the building, it stands on a hill out of the valley, and for the first time industry was moving away from the valley from which it developed earlier.
And that's 1912.
And this is John Kite Collett. He made his fortune in the provisions trade, and this, of course, is the Collet Park he gave us. It's developed an awful lot since, of course.
Oh, yes, looks wonderful now, doesn't it? What's that one?
Yes, this is something of a favourite of mine, Daddy Fisher's Lane, and to me it depicts the incredible density along that industrial valley. Some 11,500 souls lived in the valley itself, whereas today several sprawling housing estates struggle to accommodate just 6,500 people.
Oh, yes, it must have been very cramped. Oh, that looks fun. What's that?
And this is our first Collet Day procession. We still hold Collet Day, the 80th birthday this year during June, And this is the very first Collet Day procession, June the 20th, 1906.
The park is also a good place to listen to a band. This one is the Frome Army Cadet Force Band. And as they're not using the splendid grandstand, I am. I'm now in Cranmore, and this is a place where people get all steamed up about, well, steam. If you don't know the difference between a 210-0 and a 264, a firebox or a signal box, it really doesn't matter. You'd still find a visit to the East Somerset Railway a fascinating experience, because this is a place where time has literally been stopped in its tracks. Cranmore Station opened in 1858. This marvellous cast-iron gents' loo opened at the same time. And in the good old days, who ever saw a station without milk churns? The telephone box dates from 1926, and it's rather special. Only 50 were ever made like this, with a stamp machine and a post box on the back. The East Somerset Railway started life as a broad gauge railway. It became standard gauge when it was taken over in 1874 by the Great Western Railway, but it came to the end of the line in the 1960s. The signal box is now not only a small railway museum, but also an art gallery, and it features the work of one of the most celebrated artists in the country, David Shepherd. He's really the man who got the whole East Somerset Railway revival rolling, and he still finds it enormous fun.
David, this isn't just a hobby with you, it's an obsession, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I go completely bananas whenever we light up blackprints. I'm helpless.
How did all this come about?
Oh, my God. Well, it all goes back to the success of my wildlife paintings, you see. I had an exhibition in New York of wildlife paintings. The whole lot sold out in the first evening. 1967, this was. 67, when we were getting rid of our steam age at the rate of knots, throwing engines away, hundreds a month. And I came back from New York, and the next day I rang up a senior friend of mine in BR and said, can I buy 2 steam engines? I just didn't think what I was doing. I hadn't a clue. And he said, what the hell do you want to buy 2 for? And I said something fatuous like, oh, it's twice as exciting as just buying 1. And that's what started it. I hadn't a clue what I was doing. Absolutely mad.
The whole railway is now in trust, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. But we started with absolutely nothing. And 14 years later, we've got all this, and it's so exciting.
And what have you got here?
Well, we've got 4.5 miles of track. It's run entirely by volunteers, bar one man. But we pay him so little that we don't sort of count that. And we steam every Sunday, and in the peak period, we steam on Saturdays and Wednesdays as well. And it's a scheduled, steam-hauled passenger train service run by volunteers without a diesel on the railway. There's not one diesel. There never will be either.
This is the pride of your life, isn't it? This
yeah,
is the
absolutely.
Black Prince.
Absolutely. I paid £3,000 for her, that's all. She was only 8 years old.
I just heard the whistle go. Does that mean we
yeah,
have to set off?
Yeah, hop up.
I've
hop
got
up,
the
my
hat.
love. Yes,
Hang on.
lovely.
Righto.
Okay.
A bit heavy-handed there on the old steam, perhaps? Well, that's not really very surprising, because I'm about to realise what used to be every schoolboy's ambition.
All right. Wow. Yes? Now what? And again?
Takes time for the steam.
Now what do I do? Push it back?
If you push it back and slow down, if you pull it back this way, it will accelerate.
How fast am I going?
It's about 10 or 15 miles an hour at the moment.
Oh, with all that weight up, it feels as if you're going tremendously fast. Is that about the right speed?
That's about the right speed, yes.
David, this is wonderful.
I know, that's what it's all about, my love. You're getting as excited as I do. We'd like to blow the whistle for the crossing keeper.
Where?
Got that handle there. Push it down. That's right.
What power?
You can pull the whistle from this side as well. The fireman is as well.
Now what?
Look where you're going, love.
We're supposed to be going slower now?
That's about right speed. You're doing beautifully. Well done.
It's like...
You've gone through that station. You were supposed to stop there. No, it's all right. Keep on going till I say stop the brake later.
Just push it forward, yes?
Just push it forward when I say yes.
Righto.
Push the brake lever closed now.
Right. Now
Close
pull
the
that
brake
one.
lever. Just pull the brake slowly. That's the vacuum brake. Keep your eye on that gauge. That's it, about there. Never mind, that's not too bad.
And if it looks any smoother now, that's because the real engine driver's taken over for the return journey. Me? Well, I'm just sitting back and enjoying a huge wave of nostalgia.